Welcome to everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us at Let's Talk Democracy tonight. We are here in community to understand what is happening in Washington, D.C. Constitutional crisis, coup, and we want to thank Michael Krasner for hosting us on Zoom and for helping us through this difficult time. As many of you know, Let's Talk Democracy was born after the 2016 election when Trump won his first term. I knew little about history or government at that time, but suddenly I became aware that something very serious was happening to our country. I see young people now struggling as I did then to understand what's going on and how to make an impact. We welcome them. We also wish to thank our loyal participants for your support over all these years. This is a scary, confusing, difficult time of reckoning in our country for all of us. If you are new and would like to receive notices of our upcoming programs, please drop me a line. I'll be happy to add you to our email list. All are invited to our programs, which are free. And our website is www.letstalkdemocracy.org. Michelle, you want to put that in the chat? And you have a chance. We at Let's Talk Democracy are reevaluating our options going forward to see how we can best meet the moment. Our guiding mission remains to educate people about our government, encourage dialogue about the basic foundations of our democracy, and empower citizens to make their voices heard. But it's not 2016 anymore. We are now faced with a president flouting the rule of law and a rogue player of great wealth making mincemeat out of our government apparatus. What follows is not preordained. We have a say in how this turns out. It's our turn to do the hard work of saving our democracy. Many great minds are trying to figure out how we got here and how to respond. But each of us will have to make our own decision on what we can do. But if you are here tonight, you know that sitting by idly is not really an option. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. This is actually our challenge, to figure out what we can do to make our voices heard individually and as a community, and to protect our neighbors. By the way, there is a 24-hour economic blackout organized for Friday, February 28th. If you care to support it, just don't spend any money that day. This is flexing our consumer muscles. No credit cards, no online, no in-person shopping, and spread the word. We need to be creative in our resistance. Over the next few weeks, we will be reimagining Let's Talk Democracy 2.0, and I invite you to join us in this journey. In fact, in our next event, which is on Thursday, March 13th on Zoom, Professor Krasner has agreed to help us articulate what we can do as a community. We really want to hear your ideas. How do we make our biggest impact? Please plan to join us Thursday, March 13th at 7 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. And as usual, spread the word. So let me introduce our speaker for tonight. Many of you are quite familiar by now with Michael Krasner, award-winning professor of political science, Queens College, and co-director of the Taft Institute for Government and Civic Education. We trust him to tell us the truth, which may be painful, but he will also lead us thoughtfully into the next stage of what we can do about this. We hope for a lively discussion after the presentation, especially focusing on how we can meet the moment. Always, please remember our rules of engagement. Be respectful of others and their point of view. Raise your hand and wait to be recognized by the moderator. 2-minute limit. Keep comments short and focused. Don't interrupt. Avoid making generalizations or assumptions. Use I statements and speak from your own experience, and no personal attacks. And now I turn the floor over to Professor Michael Krasner. Michael, what's happening in Washington, and what is our role in all of this?
Well, thank you, Ida, and thank you, Michelle, for your help, and thank all of you for being here. There's obviously a lot happening in Washington, and I'm going to do my best to cover what I think are the most important points. And I'm going to ask Michelle if she would please put up the PowerPoint at this moment. So we need to go to the slideshow version of that so we see it a little bigger. There we go. Okay, so let's move on from here. Here's the overview of what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to do a brief review of our Constitution. How is it supposed to work? How has it been working up to now? So that we have something to compare the incursions that Trump and Musk are making to. Then talk a little bit about the details of what they're doing, their goals, their strategies. Look at the responses from Congress, the courts, the government officials who are being attacked, the media, activist groups, the general public, and then where do we go from here? What's the outlook? Please go on. So you'll remember, I hope, from Political Science 100 that the key idea of the American Constitution is to avoid concentrated power, which was the evil that had been inflicted upon our forefathers by mean old George III of England, who had all the power in his hands, or most of the power anyway. And here you have a quote from James Madison, which says, "Concentrated power itself is always evil." So what we're going to be talking about tonight is the effort to concentrate power that Trump and Musk and the MAGA Republicans are making. The question for the Constitution writers was, how do you avoid concentrated power? So if we go on to the second slide, we'll see their method, which you all know goes by the name checks and balances. And the common phrase for this is separation of powers, but that's actually misleading. The better way to think about it is separated institutions that share power. And you can illustrate that for yourself by thinking about the lawmaking power. It's true that Article 1 says Congress makes the laws, but you also know that the president gets a veto, right? So there's shared power there. And the president is supposed to carry out the laws, but the Congress has a say there as well. They have to approve the people who are nominated to the high offices, and they write the laws that govern the executive branch. And the ultimate power the Congress has against the president is impeachment and removal from office. And then the third branch, the Supreme Court, has the job of interpreting the Constitution and the laws in specific cases. So that's a rough overview. Let's go on. So as far as Congress is concerned, the lawmaking power, it's important to understand that this isn't just a prohibition. It isn't just you can't rob the mail truck. It's also positive. Creating institutions. Every executive branch agency that exists because Congress passed a law that says it should exist and gave it its functions. And that includes the big ones like the Defense Department, as well as the smaller ones like the EPA, and a special case, independent regulatory commissions that we're going to talk a lot about. And they in particular can also be checks on presidential power. So in terms also of the Congress's power, the second big power is the power of the purse. Can't take money out of the Treasury unless a law has been passed by the Congress. I think we need to go forward again, Michelle. And it's one back, please. Yeah, okay. So the power of the purse is the power to appropriate money. Those agencies can't do anything. Nothing can happen unless salaries are being paid and the money has to have been appropriated by the Congress. And that's a positive power which expresses the priorities of the whole country. It's a way of saying what our values are. How much are we going to spend for defense? How much are we going to spend on education? How much for healthcare? How much to fight the climate crisis? So this is the essence of a representative government, a government that's supposed to be responsive to the people. People elect representatives. Representatives make laws, create institutions that express the priorities and the values of the people. Let's go on. So one of the things that the Congress has done is to create what we call the administrative state. This began at the beginning of the 20th century, expanded greatly during the New Deal. The parts of the government that are going to carry out the laws that Congress passed. And this can be something relatively straightforward, like writing the checks for Social Security, or it can be more complicated, like expressing the delegate or carrying out the delegated power that Congress has given to agencies to make rules to deal with a particular part of the society or the economy. Important thing to understand about this system is that it's different from the old system that prevailed in the 19th century. That was the spoils system, where it was a partisan state. Every job in the federal government was a job the president could give away, and they were given away based on party loyalty. If you worked hard for the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party won the election, your reward was going to be a job, a postmastership or whatever. You were going to get a job. This won't work in an administrative state. You can't have people writing checks on a partisan basis. We're only going to write Social Security checks for for the Democrats. So now we have the merit system. Next slide, please. Means that you get your job on the basis of competitive examination or some other qualification. The Pendleton Act was the first one that established this kind of thing. It meant that people could have careers in the federal government. Didn't matter who won the election. You weren't going to get kicked out if you weren't part of the winning party. You were there because you'd passed the exam, you were doing your job correctly. You could be there 20, 30, 40 years through Republican and Democratic administrations because you were the person who knew how to do that job. You had some expertise. You were carrying out the law. So in that context, what are we talking about when we're talking about a president trying to concentrate power? What are we talking about in terms of presidential overreach? Well, one thing the president can do is simply to refuse to do what Congress has said should be done in terms of spending money. This is called impoundment. A second thing the president can do is to try to destroy or sabotage an agency that Congress has passed, in effect nullifying the law that the agency is supposed to carry out. And a third thing that a president can do is simply to fire people arbitrarily, to get rid of people even if they are doing a decent job and haven't violated the terms of their employment. On the other side, we can go back to something like a president can go back to something like the spoils system, can insist that anybody who is going to be hired by the federal government toe the line the president sets, like believing in the big lie. President can also violate the rules and processes that are supposed to govern access to crucial government systems or data. So looking at these now in more depth, impoundment is something that's been tried by presidents. Richard Nixon was the most flagrant practicer of this art. And his claim was that he was doing it in terms of efficiency, but it was really political. He was just, holding up money on things he didn't like. And post-Watergate, in a response, a reaction against this presidential overreach, the Congress passed a law which said presidents can't do this. But as we'll see, Trump has been trying to do this wholesale, froze the whole government, all the grants and programs that the government runs, as well as doing it with specific agencies. In terms of destroying an agency, we've had Musk bragging that he fed the Agency for International Development to the wood chipper and writing, RIP for the Consumer Financial Protection Board. He and Trump justify this by saying that the people who were in these institutions were lunatics or they were corrupt. And they physically lock people out of their offices. They terminate the contracts that the agency has with outside groups. They prevent the workers from doing normal activity. And this stuff, in addition to these two agencies that have been particular targets, there have also been threats to do this to the much larger and more important Department of Education. In terms of sabotage and firings, the president does have the legal authority to fire certain people in the executive branch, cabinet secretaries, for example, and the people immediately beneath them who've been appointed by the president serve at the pleasure of the president. That's totally kosher. But there are other kinds of agencies, like independent regulatory commissions, where that does not apply. The way that works, which we'll see on the next slide, is that those people are supposed to be there for fixed terms. If we could have the next slide, please. And the reason for that is that Congress has delegated authority to them to oversee certain parts of the economy. For example, the National Labor Relations Board is supposed to oversee the relationship between workers and corporations. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is supposed to set rules and enforce them to make sure people don't get discriminated against on the basis of race or creed or religion or gender. That proviso is supposed to protect them precisely from a president who has a different set of priorities. Trump, going against that law, has simply gone ahead and fired people from their jobs as commissioners. Let's go on to the next slide and the one after that as well, please. Okay, so how is this illegal? It's illegal because the law that set up the agency in the first place says can't fire the commissioners unless they've done something wrong or they're not doing their duty. And there's no evidence of this in the cases where Trump has been firing these people. So this is the subject of several lawsuits, including one by the person who used to be the chair of the NLRB, saying that her dismissal was illegal precisely because there was no cause. In addition to these specific attacks on the independent regulatory commissions, Trump is now trying to get control of all of them by issuing an executive order which says all of these agencies are going to report to the Director of Office of Management and Budget. This is Russell Vought, the author of Project 2025. And it's certain, this just happened yesterday, this is going to be, I'm sure, the subject of another legal case because it goes at the very essence of what these agencies are supposed to be and do. Let's go on. Same points apply to the inspectors general. The inspectors general, we should go back one. The inspectors general are people whose job was created again post-Watergate. They are watchdogs within the agency where they work. There's an inspector general at the Defense Department, at the Agriculture Department, and so on. Trump fired first 17 of these and then added the inspector general from AID. And again, these people are only supposed to be dismissed if they have done something specifically wrong or failed to do their jobs. Some of them physically resisted, saying that their firing was unjustified. One of them in particular, who had to be escorted out, is now suing because she says that her rights as an employee were violated. So these cases are all working their way through the courts. Next slide, please. There's also been a general assault on, the whole federal workforce, a simple attempt to make it smaller without any particular basis for doing that. Just, randomly, whoever you can get rid of, you're going to get rid of. So there's a buyout offer of dubious legality that 75,000 people have actually signed up for. There's the more recent firing of all the probationary workers in the executive branch, or most of them, who aren't protected by the civil service rules in the same way that people who've been there past the probationary period are. Another way that Musk and Trump are trying to attack the whole government is to end the leases that the government has for office space where agency workers can do their jobs. Obviously, you haven't got an office to go to, tough to do your job. Why are they doing this? Well, we'll get into this in more detail, but one possibility is that they're looking to finance tax cuts for elites. There's also the idea, made famous by Grover Norquist, who said, I want to reduce the federal government to the size where I can drown it in the bathtub, that they're just anti-government. They want the government to go away. They don't like government in general, for reasons that we'll talk about in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay, so the general goals, what's behind this? Well, they're obviously looking to greatly increase presidential power. They want to make the Congress powerless. They're looking for authoritarian rule that's going to serve the interests of rich people and corporations. They're looking to do away with regulation, which is what a lot of the federal government is all about, so that corporations have unchecked power. And they're also looking to get rid of social welfare programs. Right now, they've got food stamps and Medicaid in their sights. This is what the Republicans in the House of Representatives are proposing to cut, but it's fairly clear that they're going to have to get to Medicare and Social Security sometime soon, because that's where the big amounts of money are. Next slide, please. So the strategy, how have they been trying to do this? You've probably seen these phrases in the media. They're trying to flood the zone with shit, to overwhelm people with so many things happening at once that people just, are so back on their heels that they can't respond. The first two quotations here are from Steve Bannon. The move fast and break things actually comes from Facebook, the founder of Facebook. So one way that they're trying to do it is volume and speed. Another is distraction. While, all this is going on, Trump is going on and on about how the United States is going to own Gaza and make it into the Riviera and all the rest of this. And that gets a lot of media attention. And the crazy appointments, Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and people like that, that also is a huge distraction from this attempt to decimate the federal government. Another way, and this is crucial stuff, so I'm going to slow down a little bit here. There was the possibility, particularly in the case of Hegseth, the person who has recently been approved as Secretary of Defense, there seemed at the outset to be a good chance that there would be enough Republican senators to vote against him so that he would not get the job. You remember the Republicans have 53 votes in the Senate. If they lose 4, then they've lost the vote. If they only lose 3, if it's 50-50, then they can win, because the vice president will break the tie in favor of the Republicans. So in regard to Hegseth, first there was opposition from the senator from Iowa, Joni Ernst, who is herself a veteran and a survivor of sexual assault. And Hegseth, as you know, had been accused of sexual assault. And there was also later opposition from Tom Tillis, the Republican senator from North Carolina, who was actually organizing among Republicans to try to defeat the nomination. In all these cases, there were 3 factors, 3 ways that Trump and Musk and the MAGA Republicans put pressure on Tillis and Ernst successfully to get them to vote in the opposite way from what they wanted to vote. First had to do with votes. There was going to be, if Tillis or Ernst voted against Hegseth, there was going to be a primary opponent. When Trump found out that Tillis was opposing Hegseth, Trump was actually on Air Force One with a bunch of North Carolina state senators, and he said to them, "Which one of you wants my endorsement to run against Tillis?" There was going to be a lot of money for that primary opponent. Elon Musk was basically going to give him a blank check. And finally, and this is neglected in the mainstream media, but it's very important, we're in an age where anybody who opposes Trump makes themselves a target for violence, and not just themselves, but their families. So the combination of these factors reversed the votes of both Ernst and Tillis, and they helped to approve Hegseth as Secretary of Defense instead of being the key votes against them. So there's a lot of power here. There's a lot of power. Next slide, please. Another thing you can do, and Trump and Musk both very, very good at this, is lie your ass off. Say the agencies were corrupt. Say that people, on the Social Security rolls were 150 years old and still getting checks. Complete bullshit. But it plays well. It gets media attention. You can claim that you're transparent when you're actually opaque. You can claim that you're being efficient. You can put forth all kinds of stuff. And finally, you can justify your actions by saying that you're saving the country, which is what Trump said over the weekend, which brought the response here from Adam Schiff. Trump says he who saves the country does not violate any law, and Schiff says, spoken like a true dictator. So now let's look at some of the specifics of what Trump and Musk have done. Trump issued an executive order overturning birthright citizenship, which is plainly stated in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that anybody born on American soil is a citizen. He also denied immigrants their right to request asylum, delayed on his own a law that banned TikTok, fired, as we've already seen, the inspector generals. And we haven't talked about this much yet, but Musk's little cadre of tech bros, these systems engineers, these computer experts have been running amok in the executive branch, getting access to the Treasury's system of payments, which pays most of the bills for the federal government, the Office of Personnel Management, trying now to get access, with some success apparently, to Social Security records and the Internal Revenue Service records. I don't know about you, but it does not make me happy to think that Elon Musk and these guys, one of whom was 19 years old, are going to have access to my Social Security number and my tax returns. We've already talked about the general attack on the federal agencies, so let's go on to the next slide. They've attacked the specific agencies. We've talked about this. They've also, haven't talked about this, they purged the Justice Department and the FBI of anybody who had anything to do with prosecuting the January 6th insurrectionists. And I said before, they're interrogating people as to whether they believe the big lie. They're also preventing agencies such as NIH, National Institute of Health, and the Center for Disease Control from communicating to the public. Come back and talk about that more later. And they're demoralizing in general government workers. And they're promoting the alternate view of reality that's associated with Trump's rallies and Fox News. One thing to note here is that Musk and his companies are themselves immediate beneficiaries of these actions. New York Times did a really nice piece on this. They put one of their crack investigative reporters, Eric Lipton, on this. Apparently, he spent a year looking at the details of Trump's business connections to the federal government. You see here, they're large. And it turns out that there are 32 separate actions, enforcement, complaint, investigation actions by the federal government against Musk and his companies. The disruptions of the federal government and the agencies like the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, which is one of those involved, are almost certainly going to bring an end to all of these actions, which means that Trump and his companies, Musk and his companies are likely to get off scot-free, to be unhindered by the regulations of the federal government as a result of the stuff that Musk himself is doing. Next slide. How about responses? Anybody pushing back against this? Well, let's start with the Congress. Republicans, quite the opposite, mostly cheering Trump on. There have been a few occasional dissenters. As we noted, there have been a few people who started to dissent and got crushed. But in general, the MAGA Republicans are lining up and swearing allegiance. Let's go on to the Democrats in the Congress, please. Two more slides, please. And one more. There we go. The Democrats. Yeah, okay. There have been some strong responses from individuals, as you know, people like Bernie and some of the squad members and the senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy, have been making strong statements. And Bernie's now on the road. He's in Nebraska and Ohio, making speeches to try to rally public opinion. But the congressional leadership has been mostly AWOL, and the need for a consistent spokesperson or spokespeople, which Robert Kuttner pointed out in a nice piece in the American Prospect just today, there's a vacuum there. There's a void. There's nobody who can command the media in the same way that the president can or Musk can. Democrats haven't figured this out. They probably do need to figure it out in a big hurry so that there's something more like an even contest in terms of who's getting media attention and who's telling the truth. But obviously, it's hard to work it out. A lot of people who are ambitious within that party, and it gets complicated. Next slide, please. Responses in the courts. I'll try to go through a few of these. The birthright citizenship executive order has been blocked by no less than 4 different district court judges. Courts took no action on the TikTok thing that Trump did. Freeze on federal spending has been blocked by a federal judge, but it's been hard for him to get the government to actually restart the spending. They restarted some, but not all, and he's been pushing, and the results are mixed. With regard to the dismantling of these 2 agencies, again, halted by the courts, but workers are still locked out. There's chaos among the contractors and the overseas workers. It's still a huge mess. Some of the efforts to purge the FBI have been blocked. Others have gone forward. The access of Musk's people to the crucial data in the Treasury, supposedly this has been restricted. They are only able to read now. They can't change the code, but the future is uncertain, and what they've already done is uncertain. Federal buyouts allowed to continue. Next slide, please. Important to notice that it's both Republican and Democrat appointees by Democrat and Republican presidents who've been making these decisions. But obviously, in the end, it's going to be the Supreme Court that matters. Let's go on to the next slide. There we go. The first test case that's likely to come up has to do with the head of one of the special agencies, the independent agencies that we talked about previously. This is called the Office of Special Counsel. It was supposed to protect whistleblowers within the executive branch. Same situation, can only fire the person for malfeasance or not doing their duty. Lower court grants a temporary restraining order saying president clearly violated the law here, but the lower court also says constitutionality of this law is at issue. Let's go on. And the Supreme Court has been moving in the direction of declaring all of the laws that create the independent regulatory commissions unconstitutional under a doctrine, crackpot doctrine thought up by former Justice, now deceased, Scalia, called the unitary executive, which holds that because the president is the head of the executive branch, all the power of the executive branch has to be concentrated in the president, no sharing. It's really bizarre. But anyway, this is the view that the 6-person majority on the Supreme Court seems to be inclined to. So it's very likely that they're going to decide this case and all the other independent regulatory commission cases for Trump and create a precedent that's the opposite of what people like Gwen Wilcox wanted when they brought their cases, and also the opposite of what the Congress wanted when they set up these independent regulatory commissions. Let's go on. Other cases. What does it mean for cases where people have been fired in violation of civil service protection? What does it mean if the president's destroying an agency that Congress created? It's up for grabs and not clear whether the court's going to cede all the power to Trump or give him just part of what he wants. If I had to guess, I'd say that they're probably not going to give him the ability to rewrite the Constitution, so he won't get birthright citizenship revoked, but he may get considerable power to reshape the federal government. Next slide. So is it a coup? Is it a constitutional crisis? There are people, good people, smart people who say not a constitutional crisis because the president hasn't actively defied a court order. And then there are other people equally smart, Timothy Snyder and so on, who say it is a coup. Pretty clear that if it was an unelected billionaire seizing power in a foreign government, our press would be saying that it was a coup, but they're not calling it that here. Next slide. My own view is that it is a coup because I think that there has been a considerable shift of power already in the direction of the president. And I think it's likely, as I just said, that it will shift even more in that direction. And no matter what the decisions are from the courts about these two agencies, it's going to be very hard to put them together again. It's like Humpty Dumpty, hard to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Further, I don't see how you get Musk and his people out of those agencies. And I don't see how you neutralize or take away from them the power that they've gained by having access to those databases. And the Lord only knows what Musk and Trump and Stephen Miller and Russell Vought are going to do with all our private information. One of the things they can do certainly is profile voters and make it a lot easier to persuade them in an election. So I think, I think that there's been a definite shift of power. And I think, the task is going to be to try to redress the balance. But I think the balance has already shifted a lot. Next slide. Another way in which it's a coup is that the federal government is going to become an agency of propaganda. Federal government used to be an information source that was reality-based and science-based, but Trump and Musk and their minions are already purging things like gender out of the language of the federal government. And they're going to replace it, you can be sure, with the language of Make America Great Again, with the language of Fox News. So it's going to be an anti-government, anti-immigrant, anti-science, anti-expertise, etc. point of view that's going to come across. And one question is how effective that propaganda is going to be in influencing public opinion. That's one of the things that's up for grabs, and one of the things where there's a great need for a lot of pushing back. Next slide. So what's the media doing? How's the media responding? To make this analysis, I'm going to ask you to distinguish reporting from framing. Reporting just means saying what's happening, describing what's going on. Framing means putting a name on it, telling people what it is. This is a coup. This is a constitutional crisis. This is somebody violating the Constitution. Some of the mainstream media has been doing this. The Guardian newspaper has been doing this. Left-wing sources, Democracy Now! And so on, they've been doing it. But most of the mainstream media hasn't. And keep in mind that this is a mainstream media that even before all this happened, demonstrated that it was feeling intimidated. Washington Post, Bezos killed the editorial that endorsed Harris. And most recently, the Washington Post killed an advertisement, an anti-Musk advertisement that was just about ready to run. ABC caved into Trump on the lawsuit and paid him, what was it? I think $12 million. So the mainstream media, not exactly a profile in courage. Let's go on. If you look in more detail at the New York Times, you see the distinction between reporting and framing very clearly. They have terrific reporters. You read Charlie Savage, guarantee you, you're going to learn something. And Lipton and Haberman and the others as well. But the newspaper itself won't frame this as a coup. They won't say that in the headlines. You can see the influence of Charlie Savage's reporting. They come close when they're giving him a headline: Trump brazenly defies laws in escalating executive power grab. What's an executive power grab if it's not a coup? It's a euphemism. But then when he's not writing the story, you get this kind of pablum. Inside Musk's aggressive incursion into the federal government. Sounds like he ran a stop sign. There's a very good analysis of this, by the way, in Carol Cadwallader's Substack, which I highly recommend. Next slide, please. So public opinion. There has been a little bit of a dip in Trump's approval ratings as all of this has been going on, but it's small. It goes like 53 to 47. It's not the big OMG reaction that you would need to be significant. There's some confusion about what Trump is actually doing. Some of the people who voted for him are probably just perceiving, oh, there's a lot of action in Washington. You know, he's shaking things up just the way I hoped he would. So this is up for grabs at the moment. Let's go on. There are some heroes in this story, among them government officials at the various agencies where Musk and his people showed up and, tried to get their grubby little paws on this very sensitive information. Career official at Treasury, Daniel Lebrick, stood in the way, prevented them from doing it. He was pushed out and fired. Same thing at AID. Same thing at the Social Security Agency. And you probably know the very dramatic situation with regard to the Justice Department cases against the mayor of New York, Eric Adams. The two lead prosecutors on that case, Daniela Sassoon and Hagen Scotton, both resigned rather than drop the charges as part of the dirty deal that the Trump administration made very openly, very explicitly, saying out loud that they would drop the charges against Adams if he agreed to go along with their immigration policies. And interesting thing about this is that both Sassoon and Scotton are conservatives. She clerked for Scalia, and Scotton clerked for Roberts. And Scotton, on top of that, is a military veteran with 2 Bronze Stars. So it's hard to say that these people are, are crazy radicals. But they quit because they have some principles, which was great. Next slide, please. Resistance among activist groups. There's been a lot of stuff on Zoom, a lot of people, a lot of groups, sometimes in coalition. Indivisible, Citizens Action, Move On, Working Families Party have been doing stuff together. Others have been doing things on their own. They're getting pretty good responses. Their strategy seems to me to be a little bit questionable. They, for instance, put a lot of energy into opposing Russell Vought's nomination for OMB, which was sure to pass. And they're also trying to shift some red state reps. We'll see if that works, but there has been some pretty strong response. The ACLU got 50,000 people onto its Zoom call, the most they've ever gotten. So there's some encouraging stuff there. Next slide, please. On the other hand, the not so encouraging news is that both small and big donors seem to be reluctant to give money, seem to be a little bit uncertain about whether the Democrats as a party and whether these groups as individual groups are working effectively against Trump. So the money spigot has turned off, and the Republicans are moving while these groups and the Democratic Party are kind of back on their heels. The Republicans are pushing. Next slide. The Republicans are trying to make voter suppression part of the federal laws. They are trying to pass a law called the SAVE Act, which is justified as preventing fraudulent voting. There is no fraudulent voting that matters. The idea of this act is that anybody who registers for the first time or is re-registering because they moved has to have serious documentary proof of citizenship, a passport or a certified birth certificate. Only half the people in this country have passports. Getting a certified birth certificate is a pain in the neck, can cost you money, can mean you have to go in person to the office and ask for it. It's a big deal. And you have to present this documentation in person. Next slide. It particularly hits married women. 84% of the women who get married in the United States take their husband's name, which means that if they go back for their birth certificate, the name's going to be different. And that's going to cause a problem for them to register. And it's a time-consuming, expensive process to get it anyway. And again, you have to present it in person. So this will disenfranchise women. And as you know, there's a gender gap. Women mostly vote for Democrats. Next slide. In general, it's going to disenfranchise people who vote for Democrats, in addition to women, students, and poor people.
Yeah.
The result of this could be that we still have elections, but they're not representative anymore because certain groups have been systematically prevented from getting to the polls. Next slide. A brief digression. Should we be discouraged because of what happened in 2024? Are there more of them than there are of us? Trump got the plurality of the vote, after all. There are two ways to say no, and I can't go into either of them in great depth, but I'll just mention them. There's an investigative journalist named Greg Palast who has focused a lot on voter suppression, and he's got an extensive analysis that says that voter suppression is what gave Trump the victory in 2024. If it hadn't been for that, Harris would have won. If you want to see more of that, just Google him and it will come up. My view is that when you get beyond the diehard MAGA people, or maybe 35 or 40% of the voting population, the other people who mattered, the ones who got Trump up to 48.5%, they weren't voting for him because they loved him the way the MAGA people do. They were voting on economic issues. They thought that somehow he'd be better for working people. They didn't get the idea that he was going to be bad for them as working people. You know, they're low information voters. They don't pay good attention to what's going on. Point is, they're not true believers. They could change their votes. They're available. Next slide. So there's some basis for hope, but short term, it's a grim picture. There are smart, experienced people who have war gamed this situation where you've got a very aggressive president who's pushing for more power, and the outcomes of these simulations were not encouraging. There's not a lot that the opposition can do that's effective in the short run to prevent this. So we may be in for some tough times, which could, if these trends go unchecked, if there isn't strong pushback, we could get to one of two alternatives. The first one is bad and the second one's worse. Next slide. Bad alternative is authoritarian rule. Strongman rules in favor of the rich. You've got an oligarchy with benefits for big corporations and billionaires. You've got big cuts in social spending. You've got serious voter suppression. You're going to have the possibility of stealing elections. And if you speak up against this, you know, you may get clobbered. You may get accused of being a terrorist. You may have your taxes audited. You may wind up in jail. Keep your head down, you'll be okay, because this is not a government that cares if you are not challenging them. The worst alternative is totalitarianism, where the government cares about everything, where the government wants complete control and intrudes into private life. In this scenario, MAGA doctrines would be preached everywhere: churches, schools, businesses. Loyalty to the leader would be paramount. There'd be political police all over the place. There'd be a lot of people in jail or worse, and you wouldn't be able to have a private life. Next slide. So what can we do to avoid these terrible alternatives? Well, you know this as well as I do. We can protest. And there were protests in all 50 states on Monday. Decent start. Wonderful sign in New York, hand-lettered sign that said, "Worst sequel ever." There were also Save Our Services rallies today. I don't know how big or small they were, but that's another good thing. I'd have mentioned something that I think is even better. The consumer boycott on February 28th. So-called consumer blackout day, where you don't particularly buy gas, don't help the oil companies or anything else from a big retailer. If you got to buy, food for dinner, go out and buy it from a small retailer. The message to the corporations, and it's important because after all, we have seen they have the power, is that we consumers will use our money power if they don't mend their ways. Next slide. The problems and the strengths of this strategy could hurt some working people, retail store clerks. The outfit that's running this, the People's Union, inexperienced leadership, no clear demands. What they're protesting immediately is the rollback of DEI. That's a little narrow in my view, but I think it's got a lot of potential. If you think about the options, not everybody can commit civil disobedience. Some of us are too old. Me, for example. Not everybody can go on strike from their jobs. Not all of us has jobs. I'm retired. And people who have jobs can't miss a day's work often. They just can't. But everyone can withhold their discretionary spending. And it is precisely discretionary spending that powers the American economy. So I think the potential of consumer boycotts unlimited. It's an idea I've been trying to sell to 350.org for a long time. They haven't bought it, but I hope that some of the big groups like Move On and Working Families Party that so far haven't signed on to this, which I think is a real pity. I hope they will. Next slide. Electoral politics. One of the things that those big groups that I just mentioned are doing is trying to prepare for the 2026 elections, to put pressure on Republicans in the swing districts to either shift their votes or be defeated. You see some of the groups that are working on that here. Movement Voter Project is my personal favorite, but they all do good work. Next slide. This electoral work could benefit from backlash among the general public against what Trump is doing. If the people who benefited from the particular agencies that he's going after notice and respond, if people in general notice that the office that protects them from epidemics in the federal government, in the Center for Disease Control, has been eliminated, or if they just have the sense that the government that worked for them is being devastated, if they don't like the idea, which, I hope they won't, they shouldn't, that these infants from Musk's companies have their eyes on our private information, maybe they'll respond by becoming active, either in terms of self-interest or in terms of principle. There may also be a pocketbook effect. Next slide. 2 points about the economy. All this stuff that Trump's doing, and you could see this in Robert Hubble's newsletter today. All this stuff that Trump's doing, firing workers, putting on tariffs, passing cuts in taxes for rich people, this could have a bad effect on the economy. And if it does, that should redound against Trump and the MAGA Republicans and help the Democrats in 2026. They only need to win 3 seats, 3 more seats to get the House back. But obviously that's just a start. You need to have control. You need the same trifecta that the Republicans have to undo the damage. Next slide. Second point about the economy. Let's suppose that Trump and Musk succeed. Let's suppose they really do get rid of regulation. What do we know about unregulated capitalism? Here's a hint for the old folks. Do you remember the S&L crisis? Here's a hint for the younger people. You remember the financial crisis of 2008, 2009? What do we know about unregulated capitalism? We know it goes down the tubes. We know it crashes. And when there isn't a crash, so far throughout American history, the incumbent party gets blamed. Now, maybe this can be gaslit. I hope not. But it's possible that all this deregulation will produce a crash that reverses the balance that makes people vote for the Democrats. Next slide. There's also the immediate issue of off-year elections, and one small bright spot is that the Democrats did flip a state Senate seat in Iowa in a special election where Trump won by 20 points. Next thing that's up for grabs is the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the seat that's at stake will determine whether, what direction that court goes in terms of things like gerrymandering and reproductive rights. April 1 is the election day. The Movement Voter Project is having a meeting on this tomorrow on Zoom at 8 p.m. If somebody can copy what's here and put it in the chat, I'd be grateful. Or you can probably just Google that and get it. And there are going to be other special elections, obviously. So there are lots of chances to get involved. Next slide, please. So, as always, there is work. There's work to be done, work that may be more important than any work that we've ever done before. So thank you for everything that you're doing, and thank you for your attention tonight.
Thank you, Michael. What a whirlwind. But you said you were going to fix it all. I thought you said you were the one that was going to fix it.
That's next week. Next week.
Right. So I remind anybody who came in late that we're going to have another meeting on March 13th when we're going to talk about what we as a group, Let's Talk Democracy, plans to do to meet the moment. So we're calling it Let's Talk Democracy 2.0 to see how we want to address the issue. So anyway, we're taking questions. You can raise your hand. I will try to read what's going on in the chat. But I know that Puya Singh Kang had something in the chat before, and Dorothy Krasner. Either one of you want to start off the questions to Professor Krasner?
Hi, sure. This is Kyoshin.
Oh, Kim-san.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize the way you had it spelled. Great.
No problem. Someone else actually said that recently too. Michael, thank you so much for your presentation and just for laying out everything from the beginning, like what government's supposed to look like. That's just a really good reminder. I guess mine was more of a reaction, giving the president this much power. Is this the biggest loophole of all in our government? Is there why didn't we not think of this, especially if we were all about getting, not being under a monarchy, and having one person, one king. Why didn't we think of this before? And maybe do you see this as something we can, if we still have our democracy in a few years, do you think we can implement some things to prevent this from happening again?
Okay, terrific question. You have to give credit here to the people that wrote the Constitution, people like Madison and Hamilton. They were worried about this. They were very worried about it. And that's why they had the veto. That's why they had the power to the Congress, and that's why it was possible for Congress to override the veto. They were worried about this, and that's what checks and balances is all about, and that's what checks and balances is supposed to do. The question about whether we can overcome the power that's been accumulated by the MAGA Republicans and their effort to increase presidential power and give it to Trump, that's the question of the day. And it's totally up for grabs, and it's going to depend on how many people get involved and how much people are willing to do. There's no substitute for that. I mean, it's very clear that the forces of big money, most of it, not all of it, there are some billionaires who back the Democrats, obviously, but most of the big money is backing the Republicans. And the only counter for big money is big numbers. You got to have a lot of people involved. You've got to have people in the streets. You've got to have people, doing consumer boycotts. You got to have people working in elections. You got to have people coming out and voting. So we're in a time of decision. we're in a time of crisis, and crisis means you're going to go in one direction or another. We're either going to go toward authoritarianism, or we're going to, I hope, go back in the direction of the kind of flawed democracy that we've had before. So it's up for grabs, and it's going to depend on how well those activist groups work and how strongly the public reacts.
But even just like how he was able to like get rid of agencies and fire people, and like, aren't there any protections for them?
Yeah, there are protections, and that's what the courts are going to decide, and ultimately that's going to come to the Supreme Court. And I think the public reaction will also have some effect on the Supreme Court. If there's a big public reaction against what Trump is trying to do, then I think the Supreme Court will be more cautious about ratifying his power. If there's not much of a public reaction, then the Supreme Court's going to feel like they can go ahead and it won't cost them anything in terms of their own power and standing. So I think the public reaction is going to be crucial.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so have a number of people with questions. Michael, I'm going to interject mine. Timothy Snyder suggested that we have an opposition party. We have something like a people's cabinet. Have you heard about that? And what's your take on the practicality of having something like that?
Yeah, I think there is a crying need for a kind of designated opposition, right? There's a crying need for people who are tasked with speaking against what Trump is trying to do, so that the media has somebody that they will turn to automatically and give something like equal attention and equal time to what the president and Musk get more or less automatically, right? Presidents get covered. Musk goes to the Oval Office with his snotty 4-year-old. He gets covered. There's no equivalent right now for the Democrats. So the idea of a people's cabinet is a great idea. The idea that Robert Kuttner put forward today of a kind of rotating spokesperson for the Democrats is a great idea. The difficulty is who's in the people's cabinet and who decides who's in the people's cabinet and who's going to be the spokesperson for the Democrat. How is that spokesperson going to be chosen? That's the tricky part, right? Because within the Democratic Party, there are lots of people who would love to be the spokesperson because, big secret, they want to run for president, right? Gretchen Whitmer, Chris Murphy, yeah, you can name them as well as I can. So how does that get sorted out? How do you choose who the spokesperson's going to be? How do you assign roles? How do you decide who gets to be in the people's cabinet? It's politics, right? Here's where things get tricky. The Democrats should be trying to do this. They should be trying to work this out one way or another, whether it's rotation or, somebody does it for a week and then somebody else does it, or it's always done as a group or whatever. This should be the first thing, the top of their to-do list. But as far as I can tell, there's nobody within the Democratic Party that's really pushing in this direction. And that is a huge mistake, a huge mistake.
Is there anything we can do to?
Yeah, everybody should be writing their elected representative and saying, God damn it, you people need a spokesperson. Work it out. Figure it out. Don't be such jerks. Don't be sitting back. This is a crisis. We're playing for all the marbles. Our democracy's about to go down the drain. Where the bleep are you? And you should write that every single day. Or better still, phone them up every single day. Better still, if you can do it, go to their office, go to their local office if it's close by. I mean, it's not always so easy. But if there's, if you're in New York and there's a district office, show up and yell at them.
Dorothy,
I
did
have
you
a
have a question?
suggestion. It's more
Dorothy?
an,
Oh.
yes, it's more an inspiration. Thank you, Big Brother. In my town, Manchester, New Hampshire, we have a mayoral race coming up this fall. And before that, the Board of Aldermen will be meeting every 2 weeks. They always have public comment before the meetings. I think the next Tuesday meeting, I will be there and put my name down, and my 3 minutes will be devoted to what the hell is going to happen here in Manchester when all of our federal funds are cut off and there's no money for the water purification, and there's no extra money for the Boys and Girls Club, and there's no money for all the things, you don't have the city year kids in the schools anymore. This is your president. So how are you going to make up for what he has taken away without raising taxes? And I think, we have a mayor right now who ran on the idea that he, having been himself an addict and now in recovery, he knew what homeless people needed, and he was going to be better than our previous mayor, who admittedly, was not very effective on the issue. And at the end of last year, a little report came out that according to one of the not-for-profits that tracks things, homelessness increased under this mayor by 52%. So, he's got a lot to answer for. I think anyone who has municipal elections coming up, and this goes back to Tip O'Neill, act
Here.
locally. And it's
Here.
especially effective if you do have local media. We have a newspaper, which, used to always hit lists of the 10 worst newspapers in the country, but they're local, they're locally owned. They will respond to local stories.
Mhm.
So, the chance to speak is there, and especially for those of us who can't go marching anymore with our fused vertebrae and our limps and our whatnots. I can't march either, but I can go be a noisy little old lady at the aldermanic meetings.
Thank you,
Hear, hear.
Dorothy. Michael?
That's my sister, and I'm proud of her.
Okay, we have quite a few people. I'm going to ask everybody to keep their comments short. I have Tesla, Sheldon, Mark, Mairead, Michelle, Madhu, and Lisa. So let's do Tesla first. No? Okay. Sheldon?
Hi, sorry, I didn't.
Oh, there you go. There you
know
go.
if I would be on camera. I got stars on my face and everything, so don't mind me. It was a great. You were great. I'm so
Thank
glad
you.
I joined. You had a lot of powerful messages, and I'm with a few others here in a group that's trying to organize and go to these protests and talk actively about these things. And it's so important that we stand up for what we believe in, and there is some things that we can do. It is grim, and listening to you, it's a little bit heartbreaking because it's such a it's sad. It's hard that we're in this situation and that so many people just we already know. We already know what I was gonna say, but one quick other thing I wanted to ask is, do you think that donations are important? And the best thing to do is calling right now, right? Which we've been doing. We have a call relays and stuff like that going. But as far as donations, do you think that that's important to do, and where would we donate to if that's important?
I do think donations are very important.
Okay.
And there's a whole range of groups, and one of the things you can do is look at their websites and see if you can get a sense of which one of them is the closest to your own point of view. I mean, I mentioned a couple: the Movement Voter Project, Focus for Democracy, Move On, Indivisible, the Working Families Party, Our Revolution, Greenpeace, the Sunrise Movement. There's there's just an awful lot of groups out there, good ones, a lot of them. And I mentioned in one slide that donations both from both big checks and small checks have fallen off. So now would be a particularly good time to donate some money to whichever group you feel is closest to your own point of view, because they are hurting, and some of the groups have
Yeah.
been laying people off at
Yeah,
time when they need to be expanding. They've been going in the opposite direction. So there couldn't be a better time to give whatever you can afford.
okay. All right. And is there a place that we could get your slideshow?
Yeah,
After?
you'll be able to find it on the website of the Taft Institute for Government.
Oh, okay. All
It's
right.
just
That's amazing that you work there.
taftinstitute.org.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So glad I found you two of my group members. We are a part of We Fight For, which was a call after. So our chapter is We Fight For NYC. So we're happy
Great.
to be here, and thank you so much for a powerful and meaningful call, even though there is some grim, very grim. It's been a rough few weeks, hasn't it all? But thank you
Yeah.
so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
question and for
Thank
all
you.
you're doing.
Thank
And
you.
I think Michelle can address this. I think we're going to have it on our website as well,
good.
www.letstalkdemocracy.org. Okay, Sheldon is next. Each person, please try to keep your comments short and sweet. You're muted, Sheldon.
I will try to keep mine short and sweet. I think, Michael, the biggest problem that I see is a lack of coalescence on the part of some of the groups that you mentioned and all the other groups, because I don't think that, given what I heard up through to this morning, I don't know whether there's enough urgency in among the Democratic electeds to make that much of a stink right now. I heard a really good analysis that many Democrats, perhaps as much as half of all the electeds in Congress, are afraid that if there's too much of an uproar, that Trump is going to use the pretext to roll out the Insurrection Act. Now, whether that is being overly concerned or not, I don't know. But a threat like that should concern everybody. But I think what's more critical is that there is an urgency for all these groups, these left-leaning and left of center groups, to coalesce and come up with a workable plan to try to forestall as much of this turmoil as possible. And if there's a strong enough coalescence, that will send a message to the Dems and to the electeds, and will be on a better path. But right now, it's too fragmented, it's too scattered, and the big thing is, for me, is that the certain minority groups that we thought were naturally inclined to support, let's say, the Democrats. I was going to say left-leaning, but they seem to have just walked away from us. And I think Trump has been really skillful and adept at drawing them in. I had occasion to speak with several Latino men in the past few weeks, and I've heard statements like, "Look at how great everything that Trump has done," and that's frightening. I rest.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more strongly with your point about the need for unity and coalition. You know probably better than I do that the history of the American left is a history of division, and weakness caused by that division. And if there were ever a moment where that divisiveness needs to be overcome, this is it. And I'm not in a position to say in any detail what's going on among all these groups, but I do notice that, they're all sponsoring their own events on
Yes.
Zoom. And, sometimes there's 3 or 4 groups like Move On and Indivisible and the Working Families Party and Citizen Action have been doing things together. But then you get Our Revolution, and it's Our Revolution and Greenpeace and the Sunrise Movement.
Yes, that's the
I'm getting the
problem.
feeling that, nobody's putting together the big coalition. They're working with the people who are closest to them and they feel most comfortable with, but nobody's trying to put something bigger together. And that's a huge mistake. We should all be feeling urgent, and we should all, have the idea historically of a united front, because we are up against exactly what the United Front was meant to fight all those
Yes.
years ago. We're up against potential fascism. So that's a real problem. And in the same way that I was urging people to, berate the elected representatives, the Democratic elected representatives, to get them to get out there, to the extent that we're involved with groups, whether it's, 350 or whatever, we should be pushing them to make broad coalitions and not be, huddling alone. And, going back to your point about the Democrats being worried that if they stand up and make too much of an uproar, Trump's going to roll out the Insurrection Act. I mean, boy, that really makes me angry. It's the equivalent of saying, let's hide in the basement and, waiting for the bomb to roll through the window. It's outrageous that they would be taking that kind of weak defensive point of view. I mean, if you're not going to fight now, when are you going to fight? You're going to lose everything and not fight? That's just ridiculous. And the rest of it, I think, is too complicated to go into, but you raised a lot of other good points. Let's go on.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah. 2 points. Number one, Professor Krasner, have you ever heard of Evil Geniuses by Kurt Anderson?
I know Kurt Anderson's work. I don't know that book.
Okay, yeah, because I listened to it and it really was very helpful in terms of understanding how we got here. Again, we know that this didn't happen when Trump got elected. This started back in the 1960s, and Kurt Anderson, in that book, Evil Geniuses, actually walks you through how we got here. So I would encourage people to take a look at that to better understand. The second point I wanted to make, I'm looking at the chat. Yes, politics is local, and like your sister talked about, politics is local. So what about if we adopt that idea of a people's cabinet, only we do it locally, even in our district? I mean, either you're talking about, you're talking about Let's Talk Democracy 2.0, which, by the way, I can't come to that meeting. It's a Jewish holiday. It's called Purim. That night is Purim. So I don't know. Again, personally, I can't make it. There might be other people, but it's it's not one of those holidays where you can't do anything, but it's a holiday when you read the Megillah, and people usually go to synagogue, even the ones that may not be particularly religious. So again, I understand the Jewish community hasn't been exactly supportive of a lot of these things that we're discussing, but still,
maybe we should shift.
But the point is the point I want to make, though, is we need to do something here locally. Maybe adopt that concept of a people's cabinet, only try to do it here in AD 28. And I can tell you, AD 28, it's really scary what's happening here. This guy ran against Andy Hevesy, and he was arrested the day of the election, and basically he got 42% of the vote.
Wow.
And he's crazy. He's absolutely insane. And he's now running for the city council. So again, it's not national. It's right in the backyard. So again, maybe just a thought. I know I see people posting. Maybe we should get together and try to see if we can form a people's cabinet in AD 28.
Yeah, that's
Nice
good.
idea.
That's good. That's worth exploring for sure. Thank you.
Mairead, welcome.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm just trying to start my video. Thanks so much, Michael, for a really fantastic presentation. What's really been coming to mind for me is this movement towards reduction in freedom for just about everybody, right? If this actually comes off the way that your bad and your worst scenarios that you described, I think are both very realistic. It just seems to me like we should be really trying to reach out to people who don't have the same views necessarily as we do. I know we probably all have family and friends, or maybe former friends, who were probably Trump voters or Trump supporters. And we're going to need those people if we're going to head off autocracy in this country, I think. We have to get those people more aware. We have to get them out of the media bubble that they're in right now, watching Fox News and Newsmax and all of those other channels, and really sort of make sure that they're informed and that we're all reading from the same truth book, if you will. I think there are so many different versions of what's going on right now. And people who maybe think this is good are not going to think it's good when their Medicaid starts getting cut and their other benefits start getting cut. And so I feel like it's not an easy thing to do. I've really not wanted to talk to Trump voters, especially since November. But I think we need to make that effort, and we need to start reaching across the aisle, because this is going to hurt everybody. And you could really argue that it's going to hurt a lot of the red states worse than it's going to hurt us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's just kind of
right.
my 2 cents.
Yeah, good. I think those are really good points. It's absolutely true that, for instance, if the infrastructure money gets cut, it's going to hit the red states harder. They've also gotten more of the money for solar installations. So, whether they know it or not, they've been the prime beneficiaries of the two big bills that Biden succeeded in passing. And if Trump succeeds in somehow reversing those, then they're going to be the ones to suffer economically. And, the other point is, it's not just cuts in material benefits. You raise a good question as to whether or not it would be possible to bring across the point that they will lose freedom as much as we will. And I think that's up for grabs. Maybe that conversation could be had and maybe it would work. I think it's worth trying. Who's next, Ida?
Ida? All right, I'm gonna jump in.
Sorry, Michelle. Okay, I guess I was I was muted. What I was saying is that we'll have time for 2 more questions. Michelle and Madhu. Michelle?
I'm gonna keep it short. Thank you, Mairead. It's good to see you. You said a lot of some of the things that I was thinking of, but going back to Sheldon's point, to build on that, I see a lot of the issues with Trump is that he has become a cult figure. And it's very difficult for people to give up when they truly believe everything that they say, and they've, elevated him to a godlike status, he refers to king and Jesus and all these different things. So that the counterpoint to that, I feel, and part of it is communication, and that I'm a big bugaboo about, the bad communication that the Democrats have had. If above being a spokesperson, the Democrats don't have a leader that people can immediately turn to and look up to, who can fight somebody like a cult figure. And even though that's not the only thing that needs to happen, I think the Democrats look very weak.
Yeah, let me throw out an idea that I talked around with some friends and they didn't like it much, but maybe you all will like it better. I thought, given the emergency that we're in, that even though you couldn't do it right away, it might make some sense for the Democrats to move up their process for nominating a presidential candidate and try to do it as soon as they could. So maybe get it done a year from now. Now that's, we're in a crisis right now. I understand that. It doesn't help in the present situation, but I think it might have some virtue over the longer run. The objection that came from one of my friends was, well, you nominate somebody in 2026, it could be a very different world in 2028. Maybe you don't want that person anymore. You want somebody different. It's true. You're rolling the dice. But this vacuum, this absence of a legitimate leader for the Democrats seems to me to be a really big problem. Now, maybe, the suggestion about local people's cabinets, maybe it's possible for movements to work at the local level and the state level and produce a functional equivalent. I hope that's true, and Godspeed to whoever tries it. But maybe this is also an idea that's worth considering. I throw it out there for just to think about.
Thank you. And I'm going to paraphrase somebody's comment from a couple of sessions ago. You didn't
Yeah.
make me happy tonight, Michael. You didn't make me happy.
And Sylvia.
Was that Sylvia?
That was Sylvia, yeah. And Madhu, you'll be the final speaker tonight to ask Professor Krasner. Thanks for
Yeah,
joining us.
thanks, Ida. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Krasner.
Sure.
Just before I ask my question, I just wanted to say, I posted this in the chat a few times. If anyone, times are going to get scary, and scary is already scary, but I think we need to build community, because otherwise people will just go into their holes and just fold in on themselves. So now is the time to build that community and just meet each other. So if you email Indivisible Queens, I'll get those emails. And Kyoshin is also, we're all kind of part of the same group, as well as Tesla. So we just need to start building and meeting each other so we can strategize, and we'll circulate information. So I just want to put that out there. So indivisiblequeens@gmail.com. And my question to Dr. Krasner is, I think someone alluded to this in the chat. How come, like, the good billionaire, why do you think the good billionaires and, like, the Obamas and those figures aren't speaking out about all this? And Bill Gates, and so on?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe they feel that the election showed that the mood of the country is going in the wrong direction, and that they just have to kind of weather the storm somehow. I don't understand why they don't feel the same kind of urgency that I think most of us on this call are feeling. I like to imagine that if I were Michael Bloomberg, I'd be trying to figure out how to commit 10 or 20 billion of my $40 billion to the current effort, to try to match what Elon and even surpass what Elon Musk has thrown into the pot. So yeah, that's another good question. And some of those people, could maybe play the role that we've been talking about of, maybe if Obama were willing to do it, since he can't have presidential ambitions, having already been elected twice. He's kind of the logical one. But I mean, I come back to one of the points I made, Madhu. One thing that may be holding people back is physical fear. If you're Obama and you're thinking about putting yourself back into the spotlight and, becoming the main spokesman for the Democrats, you got to be thinking about your own safety, the safety of your family. Are you really going to increase the chances that somebody's going to take a shot at you or your wife or your kids? That's heavy stuff. We cannot ignore that in the present situation. Our situation has deteriorated to the point where violence is a major factor in our politics. And I don't know if it explains, the absence of those people or not, but I can't help thinking that it is a factor. And the only way that you overcome that is by having large numbers of people involved so that nobody's a particular target.
Thank you.
So that's it, Michael. We're at the 8:30 mark, and there are lots and lots of other questions. But I want to thank you
Sure.
very much for this presentation, which I think was needed. In reference to what Mark was saying, we probably need to relook at the calendar and see if there might be another date, because I
Yeah.
don't want to exclude people. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do it on Zoom also is because we really want our Zoom participants, there's a national problem, so we
Yeah.
really want our Zoom participants to, be helping us to define how we go forward. So keep keep your eye on the ball, and we'll see if
Yeah.
we can come up with another date
Okay.
for the follow-up meeting.
Mhm.
Thank you all for coming. Really, really enjoyed all the questions and the participation that people had, and underline what Madhu was saying about community. That's been what Let's Talk Democracy has been trying to do really from the very beginning. And I applaud you all for coming, and stay connected to us as we try to reach out to all of you.
Thank you, Ida, for all you're doing.
And for all that you're doing, Michael. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.